All right, thanks. We'll go ahead and get started. So, hi, I'm Julie Edmunds. I'm at the Surf Center at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Some of you may know that I've been conducting an experimental study of the impact of early college high schools for the last 15 years, and some of my partners in crime are on this. I noticed Brian Phillips is on, and he's a recent addition to our team. But the sample for that study is about 4,000 students who applied to and entered 19 early colleges in the years 2005-06 through 2010-11. Today, we're going to focus on results from a different study where we looked at students who entered all the early colleges. These are called Cooperative Innovative High Schools in North Carolina over the time period from 2009-10 through 2015-16. And again, as we're going along, feel free to enter questions or comments in the chat, and I'll pause at various times to allow for comments. So in today's session, we're going to spend some time talking about North Carolina's early college model, which is the one that we've been studying. We're going to give you an overview of the design of our study that we've been conducting, and that's mainly to help you decide how valid our results are. And then we're going to talk about the impact of the early college model, and particular looking at some key secondary and post-secondary outcomes. However, we have lots of people from North Carolina who are here, but we also have people from around the country. And the term early college means different things in different places. So we're going to stop and define for a moment what we mean by early college. And so I'm going to ask people to enter your definition of early college in the chat. And so when you think about early colleges, what do you think about? Or how are they defined in your setting and in your state? And are they the same as dual enrollment? Or are they different? And again, feel free to write a definition in the chat if you'd like to. So if you are from Maine, I will say that they use the term early college to simply mean dual enrollment. However, in most states, it actually means something different. And so we're going to talk about the model as it's implemented in North Carolina. And so in North Carolina, it's actually early college. It's actually called Cooperative Innovative High Schools, but it's a pathway within Career and College Promise. And Career and College Promise is, and you'll hear a lot about Career and College Promise in different sessions in this conference, but it's basically legislation in North Carolina that allows students to take college courses while they're in high school. These are their dual enrollment courses. And so Career and College Promise has three main pathways. The first one is Cooperative Innovative High Schools. And so that's early colleges, middle colleges, and some career academies. And all of them have strong connections to post-secondary partners, and all of them have an expectation that students earn either a lot of college credit or some sort of post-secondary credential at the same time that they're earning a high school diploma. Then there's the college transfer pathway, and these are college courses that are designed to lead to an associate degree and or meet the gen ed requirements at a four-year institution. The college transfer pathway is implemented in comprehensive high schools. Cooperative Innovative High Schools are special set-aside schools. And I'll talk more about them in a minute. And then the CTE pathway, and this is again the CTE dual enrollment pathway. And this is also implemented in comprehensive high schools. And these are college courses that are designed to lead to technical credentials or workforce-based majors. There's another session where we will present results from the other two pathways, the college transfer and the CTE pathways. But today we're going to focus on that Cooperative Innovative High Schools or early colleges. So the model that we've spent our time studying is really this small school model, small school early college model, where essentially you have high school and college occurring at the same time. So we often talk about this or think about this as kind of a third space. So it's not quite high school, it's not quite college, it's some sort of hybrid of the two of them. These schools are usually located on college campuses, often community college campuses, and they serve students starting in grades 9, and then they go through grade 12 And many schools actually give students the option of a 5th year. We call it a grade 13, but the goal really there is to have students graduate with a high school diploma, 2 years of college credits, or an associate degree or technical credential, as I mentioned. The schools are really also explicitly focused on students who are underrepresented in college. So students who might be the first in their family to go to college, low-income students, students who are members of racial and ethnic groups underrepresented in college. Basically, students who might otherwise struggle to make that transition from high school to college. So, and early colleges are also really not just schools with lots of dual enrollment courses. We don't say that they're not just dual enrollment on steroids. They are more comprehensive learning environments that are focused on getting students college credit or post-secondary credential of some sort. And in North Carolina, where our study takes place, they are expected to implement a core set of practices, and these practices are called design and implementation elements. And this includes a curriculum, basically, that gives them the high school and college credit necessary to get both that high school diploma and that post-secondary degree. The schools also provide extensive academic and affective supports, and there's proactive advising. Teachers are expected to implement student-centered instructional strategies, so there's an emphasis on instructional practice. And then the schools also pay attention to the adult environment, so they have shared leadership, lots of collaboration and ongoing professional development for the teachers in the school. There are structures that are in place to support the other school components. In general, these are small schools, so they're usually less than 400 students. There's flexible use of time. People are always playing around with their schedules. And then the final component that's really necessary is a strong collaborative partnership between secondary and post-secondary. Basically, these schools are really reinventing what a high school could and should look like if it were structured to support post-secondary access and success for all of their students. So as I noted, we've actually been studying this, the early college model for 15 years. So 2006, I would say sometimes I feel like I'm studying medieval candle making. At the time, nobody was interested in early college. Now more people are interested in it. But essentially, when we look at what we've already found, so we had an experimental study. Schools that worked with us had to agree to use a lottery to select their students. So we followed students who got in through the lottery and students who went through the lottery but did not get in, and looked at the outcomes both at the high school level and at the college level for both of those sets of students. The high school level, what we found was that early college students had better attendance, lower suspensions. They were more likely to complete a college prep course of study. Early college students earned a lot more college credits in high school, and they were more likely to graduate from high school. When we looked at the college level, what we saw that early college students were more likely to enroll in post-secondary education. They took more advanced courses, and they were less likely to switch majors, so they were more focused. They had the same GPA as other students, and they were more likely to earn a post-secondary credential, and they did so more quickly in less time. So lots of positive outcomes from that particular study, but we were only looking at 4,000 students in 19 early colleges, and it really was sort of at the start of the movement before early colleges became quite so prevalent. And so we basically asked the question, well, what happens if we look at all the early colleges in the state of North Carolina? What outcomes would we see that? Would we see the same outcomes, or would we see different outcomes? So we're moving now to actually answer that question. So it's the participant. In this case, what we've been doing is looking at the participation of the impact of a student's participating in the Cooperative Innovative High School pathway or in early college. So the results from this study come from the evaluation of career and college promise. And this is a 5-year study funded by the Institute of Education Sciences at the US Department of Education. And our study has 4 main goals. We're examining the impact, the implementation, and the cost of career and college promise, those 3 pathways that I mentioned earlier. And then we're also developing partners' capacity to work with researchers and use data to improve CCP. So we have 4 partners working on the study. So SERVE is the prime at UNC Greensboro. And we have fabulous partners. So we're working with folks at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, the North Carolina Community College System, and then RAND Corporation as our research partner. So let's start by just looking at who's participating in early college and in CIHS. This slide shows the demographic characteristics of students participating in the CIHS pathway. So to read this table, we've got the number of students. In the left column is the total number of 12th graders in the state of North Carolina that fall in each one of these camps. The right column is the percentage of students, of those students who are in a CIHS pathway. So we look at, of about the 109,000 12th graders that we've got there, about 5.2% of them are enrolled in the CIHS pathway. When we look at participation by subgroups, we see that about 4.9% of the total Black population is enrolled in a CIHS pathway, which isn't too far off the average. 6.1% of Hispanic students are enrolled, and so they're enrolled at a higher rate than the general population. Females also tended to be enrolled at a higher rate than males were, and economically disadvantaged students were enrolled at roughly the same percentage as all students. And we do see this in early colleges across the country, where they tend to be more demographically representative of the population than other dual enrollment programs. All right, I'm going to preview the findings that we are going to show you here. So very similar findings to what we found in our randomized control trial. So early college students had fewer absences. We see that they had higher ACT scores. They had a slightly higher weighted GPA and a slightly lower unweighted GPA. They graduated from high school at a higher rate. They earned a lot more credits in high school, and they enrolled in college at a higher rate. So these are the way that we looked at it. So this is our study design here. So as I mentioned previously, the other study used a lottery-based design where students went through a lottery, were screened, went through a lottery, and then were accepted or not accepted. In this study, we're just looking at everybody who was enrolled in a CIHS and then comparing them to students who were not enrolled in a CIHS. So this is a quasi-experimental design. So we looked at CIHS participants, and those were identified as students who attended a CIHS or an early college for at least 90 days in 9th grade. So we identified a cohort of students. If they managed to enroll later, we did not include them in our cohort. They had to be enrolled in 9th grade to be in our cohort here. They did not have to stay enrolled, however, to continue to be in our cohort. They had to have been enrolled for at least half a year in 9th grade, and then they remained as a CIHS student in our analysis. The comparison students were then enrolled in non-CIHS schools. So they were enrolled in other schools, and they may have actually taken other dual enrollment or AP courses. So again, CCP is North Carolina's dual enrollment program. So they may have taken those courses or advanced placement courses. We looked at results for all of the early colleges, the Cooperative Innovative High Schools in North Carolina that had students in 9th grade. So there are some schools that are Cooperative Innovative High Schools, a handful of them that start in 11th grade. We did not look at those schools. And then they had to be in existence in the years that we were interested in, and then or the years for which we had data, and that was a total of 99 Cooperative Innovative High Schools. Our sample starts with the students who entered 9th grade in 09-10 and went through those who enrolled in 9th grade through 15-16, because that gives us time to look at their outcomes in high school, allows them to finish high school and make that first transition to post-secondary after high school. Our comparison group is weighted. So they look more like the participants. So basically, we know that early college students are a little bit different than students on average in a district. So we can't just compare them to regular students in the district. That wouldn't be a fair comparison. So we make the comparison group look more similar in terms of their academic background, in terms of their demographic characteristics, their gender. We included all kinds of variables in there to try to make them look as similar as they could. And then we also did some weighting based on the district characteristics, which were essentially designed to capture the quality of the normal high school experience. So we might expect, for example, that an early college might have more of an impact if the regular high school experience isn't very strong. And so we took that into account as well in our analyses. So I'm going to pause here just for a minute and just see, I don't see any questions in the chat, but are there any questions that anyone has about the study design or the model as it's implemented in North Carolina? Mostly going to pause so I can get myself some water here. All right, feel free. I can see the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to add them in. So we're looking at the results here. What we see, the first outcome that we're looking at is absences. And I'm going to pause and ask, and Sarah had a question, is it common for most early college programs to begin in the 9th grade year in North Carolina? So almost all of North Carolina's schools, we've got 135, I'm not sure, they change every year. So we're adding new schools every year. All of them except for 4 or 5 are start in 9th grade. There's a handful that start in 11th grade. And most of the models that are being implemented across the country are tend to focus on 9th graders or start with 9th graders, because one of the things that they've recognized is that there's a lot of prep work that needs to be in place to get students ready to take those college courses later on, and especially if you want students to earn an associate degree at the same time that they're getting their high school diploma. There's a lot of work that has to happen in the high school level, and starting in 11th grade doesn't allow you to do that. And so when there was sort of that shift to trying to get students that full associate degree or 2 years of college credit, the only way to do that is to start in 9th grade. So more and more schools are moving in that direction. And we're going to talk about unweighted GPA. Somebody wants to have the unweighted GPA discussion. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's look at absences first. And so this is one of the things that I was interested in. And actually we ran it by grades, and then it's like, actually the patterns by grades are kind of interesting. And so the results that we see here, so the CIHS, remember that's the early college, that's the dark blue. So that's the one on the left. The light or the teal kind of colored, I guess it is on the right. And these are the days that students were absent. So in 9th grade, we see that early college students were absent about 4.7 days compared to 6.2 days in the comparison group. So, and that difference, that's what those stars mean. The difference was statistically significant, which means that there's no, that the difference is real. It didn't really just happen by chance. So the statistical significance means that there's a real difference between these two groups. Interestingly, what do you see? Take a look at sort of the pattern that you see across the grades. And if anyone would like to indicate what they see, or put that in the chat or raise their hand. If someone's, I will say Victoria, I'm gonna have to ask for your help for identifying people if anyone raises their hand.
Mm-hmm. I'll take a look.
Thank you. But is there something particularly interesting about this pattern that you see? Big difference. So Marlene, thank you. Big difference for grade 12. Yes. one of the things that I see is if you look at the comparison group, right, the number of days that are absent increase each year. Yep. And Natasha just made this point in the text. Traditional high school students have more absences each year as they progress. And you don't see that with the early college students. The early college students have almost the same level of absences each year, which suggests that these are sort of like, this is like the average amount of absences that you would get, if you're sick or things like that. You start seeing the comparison students, starting to be in 12th grade, they're a little less interested. They're starting to skip school a little bit more. They've got senioritis. So you see sort of less evidence of that senioritis, I think, kind of stuff going on in the early college. I did find that pattern was really interesting. I had a question from Regina. I'm going to pause here before we move to the next one and just answer that question. Can you speak about how the lottery worked to ensure that you got the amount of first-gen minority in the program? Just a reminder, so our other study used the lottery. There are actually a lot of schools, not a lot, but many schools that still use the lottery. We still work with them on doing the lotteries today because they found that it was, they liked the fairness of the procedure. Many of the early colleges actually select students using a rubric, which allows them to do that. When you're using the lottery, what you can do is you can design it in such a way so that students sort of are weighted more if they meet certain criteria. So if they're underrepresented in college and they're part of that target population that you want, you can design the lottery in such a way that those students have a better chance of getting in. And we work with districts. When we do the lottery with them, we work with them and have them make sure that attorneys review it and that all of the criteria are meet legal standards. And in the legislation, it's actually, there are certain populations that are, that they're required to focus on in North Carolina, and first generation college students is one of them. All right, so here's the next outcome that we're looking at. So we're looking at some measures of academic achievement in high school. And so we're looking at ACT scores. And if we look at, we see a positive impact on the composite score. It's not a very large impact, but it is statistically significant. And I will say that ACT scores are generally pretty hard to move the needle on. So you are seeing some positive outcomes here in ACT. You see it also in math, a larger impact in English. When we did our randomized control trial, so the lottery-based study, we found a positive impact on English. We actually did not see the same positive impact in math. And then when we look at GPAs, there's what we see is GPAs are essentially the same. Difference is really small. It is statistically significant, but some of that statistical significance is because our sample is so big. I don't know if you noticed, but we've got about 600,000 students. So little differences can show up as statistical significant. So you can decide whether that's an important difference or not. But I think we had a question. Someone had a question in the chat about why you think the weighted GPA might be slightly higher and the unweighted GPA might be slightly lower. I have a theory. Does anyone want to posit a theory? Taking harder courses. Amy says taking harder courses. Students taking more rigorous, right. So North Carolina has weighting for courses that are honors level, advanced placement, and dual enrollment, dual credit courses. So they receive excess weighting for those. All of the, and actually I'm just thinking about this as we're talking about it, but all the high school courses and the early college are taught at the honors level. So they would be getting the honors weight there as well. And then they also would be getting the additional credits, you know, the number of, or the additional weighting for the AP and the dual enrollment courses or dual enrollment courses that they would be taking. So yeah, I think they're just taking more courses. They might struggle a little bit more in those courses, which might be why the GPA might be slightly lower for unweighted. But then when you add the weights in, that increases it. But again, it's not a hugely meaningful difference here. We also look at other outcomes there. So we've got early college students graduated at a higher rate from high school, and they earned more college credits while they're in high school. The second outcome is probably not a surprise. The first outcome.
Anisha? Hi, how are you doing?
I'm sorry, you're on. Can I get somebody to unmute or thank you, mute yourselves? Thank you. So as we see with the 5-year graduation rates, it's about a 2 percentage point impact, positive impact, where CIHS participants are graduating at about 95% compared to 93%. Again, both of those rates are higher. Remember that the CIHS, the early college participants, are going to be slightly different than regular participants. They are more, in general, they're more academically prepared. So, so they would have overall higher graduation rates to begin with. When we look at the number of college credits that they earned in 12th grade, earned through 12th grade, very large impacts. Remember that students who were not in the CIHS could earn college credits in the regular high school, and they could do that through North Carolina's dual enrollment program or advanced by passing the exams associated with advanced placement courses. And as you can see, you don't have a lot of that going on in the non-CIHS participants. They're earning many fewer college credits than those who are in the early college setting. Interestingly, there's still a large and statistically significant impact on CTE credits earned. I do want to point out that we looked at credits only through 12th grade in this because the comparison group, if we looked at grade 13, where many early colleges go through, the students in the comparison group would have started college already, so they would be taking college courses in the post-secondary setting. So we felt like the fairest comparison was to stop at 12th grade. So even though we've got 34 credits, early college students may earn substantially more because they would have been in the school for an additional year and could have earned more credits. And then we look at enrollment in college. So our enrollment in college information is limited by the fact that we only have data at this point for all of our cohorts for the public institutions in North Carolina. So for the community colleges and the UNC system. So, so these results are around enrollment in a North Carolina public institution. So what we look at, and in this case, I will say, doing a comparison between enrollment in college for early college students and for regular high school students is not really intuitive because we are used to thinking about enrollment in post-secondary education as something that happens after you leave high school. But in reality, these early colleges are this third space. So enrollment in college is happening at the same time while they're in high school. And these students are graduating with associate degrees. So they are absolutely regular college students who are enrolled in college. As a result, we count enrollment in college. But then that sort of gives an unfair comparison to the treatment group because really that's part of the model. So we do look at we give time for the students in our comparison group to catch up. So essentially the way we define enrollment is were they ever enrolled in college, starting in grade 9, looking through 2 years after 12th grade. So that gives credit to the students in the early college for their college experience, but it also allows students in the comparison group time to enroll in college after they graduated from high school. So even with that sort of as inclusive a definition as we could have, the early college students definitely enrolled at much higher rates. You see 94%, almost all of the students had some enrollment in post-secondary education compared to about 2/3 of the non-early college participants. And the impact rate is very large there. If you look at it, you can see that the impact is in many cases being driven by that community college enrollment. And that's a big part because the early college students, many of those early colleges are located on community college campuses. There's also a large impact on enrollment in the UNC system school, about a 7.2 percentage point impact. So positive impacts on enrollment. We looked at enrollment by grade, which is kind of an interesting thing. So this is cross-sectional. So the other outcome, let me go back here. So this outcome is cumulative. It's this idea of ever enrolled, were they ever enrolled at any point? This next outcome that we're looking at is cross-sectional. So in grade 9, what percentage of students were enrolled in college? In grade 10, what percentage of students, et cetera, et cetera. So what you see in grade 9, obviously lots of early college students are enrolled. So for the woman who is asking about whether early colleges start in the 9th grade, they do, and many students are taking those college courses while they're in 9th grade. So they get and it's usually an early college course, something that might be a little less threatening, like a college skills, college success class, or a or PE, physical education, or something like that. But you can see many students are enrolled in college at that point. In grade 10, so it increases, in grade 11 and grade 12 are where you get sort of the high point, that 77%. You may be asking yourself why this is not 100% if everybody's there. And just a reminder that we were doing this analysis using a cohort model. So basically students started the early college in 9th grade, but they may not have continued. And in general, there's about a quarter of the students that end up leaving at some point during the early college. So that's what you see here. Those students that, if they're enrolled in the early college, they are enrolled in college courses at this time period in grades 11 and 12. But the fact that it's not 100% reflects the fact that some students have left the early college at that point. You do see that about a quarter or a fifth, between a fifth and a quarter of the students in the comparison group have also enrolled in college courses at that point. So in grade 12. Then when we look 1 year out, we see that we see that dramatic bump in students in the comparison group. These are the students who have graduated from high school and are now enrolled in college. You see a drop actually in the early college. This is students, there are some students who are still enrolled in that 5th year program there. And then there are students who have also graduated, and they may have graduated with their associate degree already, and they may be out in the workforce. And then by the time you see 2 years out, you actually see very similar levels of enrollment between the two groups. And again, you've got about 10% of the students here have their associate degrees, and they basically left the program and have not continued further post-secondary education because they have what they need. And feel free, again, if there are questions about any of these outcomes, feel free to do so. So we also looked at results by subgroups. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time unpacking this chart, and then there's a couple other charts that follow the same design. So what we've got here is the outcome, so 5-year graduation rates. In this case, we've looked at it for females, and then we've looked at it for males. So each one of the charts will show you the impacts or the results for one population, and then sort of the other population that is not that population. So in this case, we've got females, people who identified as female, and people who identified as male. And then we see the impact. So these are the means, these are the averages. So 95.9% of female participants graduated in 5 years. 94% of female non-participants. So within these sort of green rows, we're comparing female early college participants with female non-participants. And then that impact is the difference between those two. So if you look again, you see large impacts, you see positive impacts across the board for all the outcomes that we looked at, the ACT, the number of college credits earned, whether they ever enrolled in UNC, and whether they ever enrolled in a community college. Then we look at the outcomes for male participants as well. And so the difference here is 2.6% for males on graduation rates, positive impacts across the board for all of these. This last line down at the bottom shows which group had the highest impact. And what we're looking at here is the difference between these two impacts. So in this case, males had a higher impact, and that 2.6% and the 1.8%, those are statistically significantly different from each other. So in that case, we know that males had the highest impact on graduation rates. CIHSs had the highest impact on graduation rates for males as compared to females. If you look at the average, you'll see that the males are graduating at a lower rate, so they kind of had more improvement, more room to grow, which is one of the reasons that the males, the impact was larger for males. Impact was larger for females on the number of credits earned, but in general, the impact was larger for males of the early college. The next one that we're looking at is around for students who are members of underrepresented minority groups and comparing them to students who are not underrepresented minority. There's a little bit of a key at the bottom there. So for underrepresented minority, those are students who are Black, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, and multiracial, and are not underrepresented minority students are Asian and white students. So these are populations that tend not to be underrepresented in college. That's how we define that. We can see again, if we look at this, we see the positive impacts looking at that row there for all of our groups. So underrepresented minority students, positive impacts on all. Not underrepresented groups, positive impacts as well on all. And then when we look at the difference, we see that there's no statistically significant difference in impacts between the two groups. Not underrepresented minority, there was a larger impact on number of college credits earned for them, while underrepresented minority actually had a much larger impact on their enrollment in the UNC system. And then the final subgroup that we're looking at is the economically disadvantaged students and not economically disadvantaged. Again, we're following the same pattern here. So if we look at this economically disadvantaged row here, the impact on economically disadvantaged students, we see that there's large and statistically significant impacts on some of these outcomes, particularly enrollment. When we look at not economically disadvantaged students, we see positive impacts, and all of them are statistically significant. This is one of the subgroups where the impacts tend to favor the economically disadvantaged, and they tend to have larger impacts there, with the exception of the number of college credits earned in high school. But you can see almost double the number of the impact in terms of enrollment in UNC. And so when we see one way of thinking about this, and it's hard to get your brain around some of these, I will say this, and if people have thoughts about how to present this information more clearly, please do send them our way. We've been trying to think about this for a long time. But one way to think about this is that this is reflective of gaps. You know, what you want a program ideally to do is to have positive impacts on all of the students that are taking it, but you do want your groups that might be starting further behind to have bigger impacts so that those gaps between your two groups can be reduced. And so when we see things like everybody's got positive impacts, that's great. And then when we see things like economically disadvantaged students have a higher impact, that suggests that this model is at least making some progress in narrowing the gaps between, for example, economically disadvantaged and not economically disadvantaged. So those are all the results that we have to share with you today. If I welcome people's thoughts about what they've heard, what do you see as the implications of these findings? Which findings are of most interest to the field? How do you think we could present these subgroup results more clearly? Any suggestions around any of that? We would welcome any feedback or thoughts. And again, if you'd like to unmute yourself and speak, just raise your hand in the Zoom and Victoria can call on you. Or you can put your questions or comments in the chat.
And Julie, I'll just say we do have 8 or 9 minutes, so we have plenty of time if people have burning questions.
Absolutely, thank you.
Hello, my name is William, and I do have a question. You mentioned earlier that this study excluded schools that have grades 11 and 12 only. Is there any research on that particular school?
So the only research that I've seen on the model, and we call that the middle college model, or in North Carolina, that was the case. And middle colleges sort of predated early colleges to a certain degree. And so there was this original sort of model that had students enrolling 11th grade. The one study that I saw did not, but that was like 20 years ago, did not find positive impacts on that when they did I think they did a randomized control trial, if I remember that. However, we are planning to look at these particular schools. Again, it's a much smaller group than the early colleges. And so hopefully we can do those analyses and come back and share the findings with you and see if there's anything. But yeah, I think it's absolutely worth looking at. But thank you for the question.
We do have a question in the chat. And I'll let you read it. Do we have, I can read it. Do you have additional data on college completion rates? The 84% of students who attended in the NCCCS after high school graduation?
So we do have data from our randomized control trial. We don't have the college completion data for this sample yet. So we have that, and you're going to ask me what the numbers are, and my brain is a little bit dead right now, so I'm not going to remember the exact percentages. But I am going to, what I'll do is the final slide is actually a collection of our peer-reviewed journal articles. And so I will, and so the results are in there, and we can do that. But there's a positive, I want to say it's about 38% of the students in our sample ended up with associate degrees, but that, again, I might be off on that. So don't hold me to it. Because some of our students don't end up with associate degrees, and they do go on to 4 years, and then some of them just don't finish. But the results are higher than they would be for regular, normal community college graduation rates. All right.
So we had a request to
email
the
data.
data.
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll post the presentation. I'm sorry I didn't do that before the session. I'll post it up in the session, and people can still, Victoria, can people access the session after it's happened in terms of downloading the materials?
They should be able to, and then there will be the recordings available for 90 days as well.
And the recordings will be available for 90 days. Yep. Yeah, so you can listen to me talk again and again and again. But yeah, there is a lot to digest. There's a lot to digest. So absolutely. All right. Any other questions? I was a third grade teacher, so I do understand wait time. So here's that last slide that I wanted to include. And so this is a resource. I know there's a lot of people out there who are doing their dissertations on early colleges, and especially if they work in early college field and are getting an advanced degree, often they end up studying their own work. So here are some of our peer-reviewed, actually, well, I guess these are all of our peer-reviewed journal articles. We have other articles that were published in non-peer-reviewed journals as well. And so this is a good start on your lit review. If you want to do that, I'm going to actually say that we're very proud that 2 of our articles are actually award winners. So we just received the Palmer O. Johnson Award for an outstanding AERA article, and that's the one that's listed at the top that was published in Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis. So we just received an award for that article. And then the 2017 article published in the Journal of Research on Educational Effectiveness also received the Outstanding Article Award for that journal in its first year of having that award. And so if you have any further questions about any of this research, and again, this research is all coming from the randomized control trial study. So the one that we've been doing since 2006. And we have not yet published the results from the current study. So you all are some of the first people to see that. So hot off the press. But thank you very much for your time and your interest in this. And please, again, reach out to j.edmunds@serve.org. My email's in there if you have any questions or want to talk further about any of our results. Really appreciate your time. Thank you. Oh, I see some folks. Bill, Community College.